Alphabet Squadron is Alexander Freed's second original novel in the new canon, following on from the first Battlefront book, Twilight Company, and also the novelisation of Rogue One. I have to say, I wasn't looking forward to this book. From everything I heard before the book's release, it was going to be set after the Aftermath trilogy and Last Shot, all four of which were a social justice warrior's wet dream, and if you've read any of them, you would know. Those books weren't about good stories, they were about shoving gay and non-binary people in at every opportunity. They weren't books designed to give new Star Wars lore, they were designed to challenge people's preconceptions about what's really male and female, and why someone can't claim to be both, and why everybody should be gay. In short, they were forced diversity in Star Wars. You think the movies are bad, if you haven't read those four, you've got no fucking idea. Based on this, the fact that Disney keeps shoving the social justice warrior stuff at the end of Return of the Jedi, and as I said, I heard this was set after Last Shot, I had zero hope for this book and fully expected it to be a social justice warrior fest, and I posted my prediction on Twitter. Then the French invaded. A platoon of rainbow-clad Frenchmen decided to defend the book, with one of them telling me I'm not allowed to make a prediction because if it's wrong it's defamatory, and he knows it's wrong because he got an advance reading copy, so he knew what was in it. Of course, being French, the pleb didn't realise that just because he's read a book that hasn't been released yet doesn't mean everyone else has, because, you know, it hadn't been released at that time. Also, predictions are allowed. If predictions aren't allowed, then neither are expectations, and how on earth could Rian Johnson subvert your expectations if they're not allowed? Think about it, France. Then another guy accused me of being homophobic and bigoted because I mentioned how I don't want another book filled with LGBT stuff right at the end of Return of the Jedi. Of course, in typical social justice warrior style, he read one thing and decided that was all he needed to read. I told him to keep reading, where I had put in a reply to my own comment that I'm okay with gay people in Star Wars, I just don't want it all shoved in at the end of Return of the Jedi the way they have been so far. I had to reply to my comment because of the character limit on Twitter, and the gay Frenchman admitted that I wasn't as bad as he initially thought, but rather than apologising and saying okay he jumped the gun a bit, he decided to accuse me of phrasing it poorly. Hey, gay French army, take it up with Twitter. It's not my fault they have a character limit. Maybe next time read more than one comment before you decide to condemn someone. Fuck you, France. You focus on your French reviews, I'll focus on mine. Anyway, I'm pleased to say Alphabet Squadron is completely the opposite of what I expected. It's a book that focuses on warfare and tactics and isn't a social justice warrior fest in the slightest. I'll say this though, because I know there are varying degrees of what people consider to be woke. There are 2 mentions of same-sex relationships, and each of them are 1 sentence each, which is fine in my opinion. If they'd have put more in, it wouldn't have been a problem because it wasn't the focus of the story like it was in Aftermath. But if you can't handle 2 sentences in a book about same-sex relationships, then you're probably more homophobic than you want to admit. You can't go around saying you're all for inclusion, then get up in arms about 2 sentences. I don't consider this woke because it is actually okay to have gay characters in Star Wars. It's just wrong to treat Star Wars as a gay pride parade the way Wendig did with the Aftermath trilogy. So for me, Alphabet Squadron was fine, and I'm pleased we finally have a book set after Return of the Jedi that isn't a complete blue hair temple. The book is set in the months between Shattered Empire and the first Aftermath book, and it's split into 3 acts. The first act focuses on each individual member of Alphabet Squadron before they're made into a team. Irika Quell is an Imperial defector, Nath Tencent is an Imperial defector and a rebel deserter, Chasna Chaddick and Will Lark are already rebels, and Kairos is just kind of already there as this mystery person. She's the one who wore the armour in the picture. Could have been armour, could have been a robot, it's armour. Eureka defects from the 204th, also known as Shadow Wing, after the events of Operation Cinder, as seen in both Shattered Empire and the Battlefront 2 game, and spends months in a place called Traitor's Remorse, a location similar to Hoth where Imperial defectors are ordered to wait until the rebellion has use for them. During her time there, she attends interviews with the functioning alcoholic Cern Adan, an intelligence officer who believes that the rebels need to stop reacting to things the Empire does and start predicting so they can prevent their plans before they start by gathering intelligence first. It's a good idea, but it seems weak to me lore-wise, since the rebellion beat the Empire and we know they had intelligence already, so acting like it's something new seemed silly to me. Perhaps Adan meant more intelligence. I don't know, I can only go off what was written in the book, and if that wasn't made clear at all, it sounded like he wanted to create a whole new intelligence unit. As well as meetings with Adan, Eureka also has meetings with a repurposed Imperial interrogation unit programmed by Adan to psychologically assess Eureka and help him decide if she really is a defector or a spy sent in from the Empire. Eventually she's tasked with finding and recruiting Nath Tencent, the Imperial and Rebel defector. She goes with Kairos, finds him and completes her mission. I think it was this mission where Kairos was shown to be very aggressive towards stormtroopers, even taking out a whole squadron, mostly using nothing but her hands. It does lend to the mystery, but I'll talk more about her later. The second mission Eureka is tasked with is to find Shadow Wing so Adan and the rest of the New Republic can stop them, since they're some kind of massive threat apparently. I didn't find them to be that important, to be honest. They had committed some very serious attacks against the rebels during the war, and they did take part in Operation Cinder on one of the many planets that were victim of that. But compared to some other things, they just seemed like a solid squadron to me, doing what other Imperials do, but better. There's nothing particularly dangerous about them compared to someone like Tarkin or Vader. They're just like any other TIE squadron, only tighter. But Eureka's mission to find them leads straight to Chasna Chadic and Will Lark. While we had been following Eureka's story, we were also following the story of the Hellions Dare, a New Republic vessel that intercepted plans for the 204th to make a stand on a remote planet called Pandem Nye, a world rich with Tibanna gas, which is fuel basically, and a place where Shakara Nures, the leader of the 204th known as Grandmother, decided to help bolster the remains of the Empire rather than try to control it, which I thought was an excellent idea, and to be honest, a breath of fresh air. After so many stories, both in Legends and canon, where one stray Imperial leader tries to control the remains of the Empire, it was nice to finally see someone take a step back and use their command to help bolster the Empire as a whole rather than take control of it on a mad power trip. The 204th knew that the Hellions Dare had the message, so a group of them chased the rebels to stop it getting back to their intelligence group, while the rest of the 204th went to Pandem Nye to fortify it and prepare it for helping the Empire. This leads to a chase through the Oridal cluster, a cluster of dense stars which makes hyperspace travel very difficult and slow, but not impossible, and it can be done, but it has to be done in short jumps. The problem is, every time the rebels jump, the Imperials manage to follow them to their new location. Now, I know what you must be thinking, because I was thinking the exact same thing as I was reading it. Not another fucking chase through space. Even through hyperspace, it didn't work in The Last Jedi, and it won't work here. Well, again, I'm pleased to say I was wrong. It works. What the Imperials were doing wasn't tracking the rebels. Rather, each time the rebels dropped out of hyperspace, they had to calculate the next jump, and they had to constantly drop out of hyperspace because of how dense the Oridal cluster is. In that time, the Imperials would arrive and attack. Each time they stopped and fought, the rebels lost at least one member of their squadrons, of which they had two: Riot Squadron, which was Will Squadron, and Hound Squadron, which was Chassis. Over multiple jumps and stops, both squadrons lost most of their members, with the two eventually uniting into one squadron. It turns out, and this is something I really liked, the Imperials weren't just picking off 1 or 2 rebels at each stop just to wear them down. They were performing a tactical manoeuvre called trapping the Bantha, and I thought this was very clever. There's no hyperspace tracking here, no sneaking aboard a lead Star Destroyer because reasons like in The Last Jedi. What Freed has done is very clever. Trapping the Bantha is a manoeuvre where a group of TIEs would basically cage in one rebel fighter, and they knew that eventually the rebels would call it a lost cause and jump to lightspeed. But here's the difference between the Imperials jumping to lightspeed and the rebels. The individual rebel ships, the fighters, the bombers, all that jazz, they're all capable of lightspeed. We know that from when Luke jumped to Dagobah in Empire Strikes Back, and we also know that TIEs don't. We know that from when they arrived at what was left of Alderaan and that one stray TIE came out of nowhere in A New Hope. So what the Empire was doing was boxing off one fighter at each stop, waiting for the Hellions there to transmit the hyperspace coordinates to the individual rebel fighters that could jump on their own. Then, once the rebels jumped, the Imperials disabled the ship they'd boxed in, captured it, and read the data, which of course had on it the last transmission from the Hellions there, which was the hyperspace coordinates. This is how they were tracking the rebels, and I thought it was brilliant. I was prepared to rage about this as I was reading it, thinking, how dare they fucking use that trick again after it was so shit in The Last Jedi. But no, I was wrong. This is a solid bit of strategic writing, and it completely makes sense. Well done, Alexander Freed. Eventually the Imperials dwindle the rebels down so much that the next time they stop, there aren't enough fighters to defend the Hellions there, and the ship is destroyed along with all the fighters except for Will and Chas, and they both jump to lightspeed to carry the message back to the rebels. Will kind of forces Chas to jump against her will, and Chas spends half the book bitching about it, and to be honest, this along with all her other quirks, like listening to the right music in battle, holding stupid grudges, not realising that the mission was important, they all made her easily the least likeable character in the book for me. She had absolutely no pros and fuckloads of irritating childish cons, and in a book where there's no humour, it can be hard to pick out the worst character, but Chas wins it by a clear mile. So those two jump, at some point they come out of hyperspace and Yrica finds them and they're brought on board the Lodestar, General Hera Syndulla's base of operations, and with all the team in one place, that's the end of the first act. I felt like it dragged on a bit, but overall it did a good job of showing how the team came to unite, because if I remember correctly, in the Rogue Squadron novel, most of the team was already together and was just a continuation of the unit from the original trilogy, so it was nice to see how this squadron came together from scratch. The second act focuses more on, once the group comes together, how they actually form and work as a team, and then being sent out on missions. Adan gets approval from Hera to start a squadron out of these rogues, and so we have the birth of Alphabet Squadron. Will in his A-Wing, Chas in her B-Wing, both of which are the ships they flew with the Hellions there. Yrica has the X-Wing she stole to find the pair of them when she was hunting down Shadowwing. Nath has his Y-Wing, and Kairos has her U-Wing. Kairos confused me throughout most of the book. She's mysterious and silent for the most part, but Yrica has a fight with her when nobody is around, and she thought she heard a voice say, "Make it right," before Kairos stalks away to the cargo lift. She's still written, even from Yrica's point of view, as being an unknown, unsure of her gender or whether she speaks at all. Perhaps she decided she imagined the voice? I don't know, but when it's written that a character thinks they heard someone say a sentence, then conveniently forgets for the sake of mystery, I feel like it's cheap writing that only produces synthetic mystery. It's like watching The Last Jedi a second time. You know most of the moments don't actually matter because they're all designed to trick you, so after that initial watch, there's no staying power anymore. Kairos even speaks again later on for some reason. I get that she's a mysterious character and it's a trilogy, so she'll be explored further on, but for God's sake, when she keeps talking and everyone keeps thinking she can't talk, it gets really fucking annoying. There's no flow of continuity there. She can't speak, everyone is surprised when she does, then they all conveniently forget that she can speak, only so that next time she speaks, they're all surprised again. It's a one-trick pony Fried has tried to use more than once and it doesn't work, and hopefully we'll find out more about her in the second book and what her deal is, because I wouldn't want another book with this trick in it. My money is she's probably like Kanan, she's a former Padawan who never finished her training, because later on they visit a Jedi temple and that's when she starts talking in the sand. Instead of talking, because you know, she's not allowed to talk unless she does it half a dozen times and everybody forgets. I think it's during the second act where it's mentioned that Hera Syndulla led the Battle of Endor. What? That's what the book states anyway. Funny, I don't remember seeing her in Return of the Jedi. I remember Mon Mothma leading the rebels overall. I remember Han leading the force on Endor to shut down the Death Star's shields. I remember Admiral Akbar leading the Alliance in the battle over Endor. And I remember Lando and Wedge flying into the bowels of the Death Star to blow it up. Sorry, but at which point exactly did Hera lead the attack on the second Death Star? Which part? Look, I'm all for having new characters in a new canon, but let's not retcon the original trilogy, okay? I've said it so many times, it's a big galaxy over a large period of time. There's literally no need to retcon anything about the OT. The remake of the OT is inevitable because Disney have just fucked up everything that came from it so badly that the only way they can make their shit make sense is to erase the OT and rewrite it so that it matches up with their bollocks. I wouldn't put it past Disney to release their own special edition of the OT, where they ram their shit in like a square peg in a round hole. There's Poe's mum escorting Luke as he flies out of the second Death Star in Shattered Empire. There's Chewie being given a medal in his namesake comic. There's lots of other examples, too many to list here, but this is what they'll do. They'll release their own special editions with all this shit shoved in with CGI the same way George did in 97, and nobody will want it just like in 97, but retards will lap it up. The finest point in the book for me was the second act when they're tasked by Hera to go and pick some stuff up from an old rebel cache. They go, and once they get there, Nath Tencent realises it's a Jedi temple. Apparently, Will had, and I quote, encountered whispers that the rebel General Skywalker was the last of the Jedi Order. And I thought that was interesting on its own, because that right there says to me, word is getting around that he's the spark that will light the fire that will burn the the Empire down. The fact that people are hearing he's a Jedi and will lead the rebellion to victory in a book released after The Last Jedi tells me somebody thinks what happened in that movie was wrong. I don't know who. It's probably Fried, since we all know Hidalgo doesn't actually bother to check anybody's work, and it probably slipped by him. But this means all the bullshit in The Last Jedi is redundant because it's already happened before in the Star Wars universe, and this book is canon. They can't say it didn't happen without cancelling out all the books and comics too. And they can't keep doing that because people won't invest in them time and time again. So that's a big fuck you to Rian Johnson in my book, straight from inside the House of Mouse. Well done, Fried. But this leads on to another thing I liked, and that's that for years I've had issues with the murky lore regarding the history of the Jedi in stories set after Revenge of the Sith. But they're in a Jedi temple, and Nath and Erika are talking about the known history of the Jedi, and Nath brings something up that fixes every story I've read that has something in it that contradicts previously established lore about the Jedi. Basically, rather than lying about the Jedi once, the Empire did it multiple times. I think it's silly because when you think about it, it doesn't really work too well because there are older people, medium-aged people, young people, and stories get passed down. But, on the other hand, Fried's hands are tied. He can't undo what other authors have written and what Hidalgo stupidly allowed to go to print. Don't even get me started on Hidalgo. He's happy to take the credit and admit people go to him for lore, then he denies having the responsibility. The man is a troll, and I've changed my mind. I do dislike him on a personal level. He's as bad as his sister wife. Try and get a straight answer out of him and he'll run you round the houses, jerking off as his mindless followers defend him. Then answer your question in a completely different post without letting you know, because that's just what he's like. He's just that nice a guy. Apparently, you're only worth his time if you lick his arsehole. It doesn't matter that you buy the books and comics, go to the movies or have the posters. He doesn't have the time of day for you if you do all that. But you tell him how amazing he's doing with Star Wars, even if you've never spent a penny on the franchise, and he'll answer all of your questions. I wonder if he realises praise isn't what keeps Disney in business, money is. Or if he's deluded himself about that too. Having said that, Freed is a nice guy. I wasn't sure how to pronounce Eureka in my head, and I was getting tired of reading it and coming up with different ways each time I read it. So I asked him on Twitter and I said, is it Eureka, Yreka, all sorts of phrases, and of course he very kindly replied that in his head it's Eureka, which is the only phrasing I didn't think of. He said that's not definitely canon, they may pronounce it differently at Disney, but that's how he heard it in his head when he was writing it, and that's good enough for me. See what that is? That's a creator taking the time to answer the question of someone who's bought their book and helping them out by giving them a straight answer. I always appreciate that from creators, even if I don't agree with the media they've created, but it shows respect for the fans. I've said this before about Charles Soule. He goes out of his way to answer fans' questions. He doesn't run them around the houses, so why Pablo Hidalgo feels the need to do it is beyond me. The difference between Freed's attitude and Hidalgo's is night and day, and it's another reason why he's no good at his job. You can't surround yourself with only the good opinions and ignore the rest. That's how you run a franchise into the ground. If 1 million people are telling you you're doing something wrong and you only listen to the 1,000 people that are telling you you're doing it right, you're not doing your job properly. Still, at this point, I don't really know why I expected anything else from Hidalgo and Disney, so, you know, that's on me. I'm just kidding myself at this point. So, anyway, back to the lore Freed has tried to explain. He basically says that immediately after Revenge of the Sith, the Emperor branded the Jedi as traitors after attempting to assassinate him, which we know is true because we saw it in the movie. But sometime later, the Empire revised their own history and downplayed the Jedi, so rather than seeming as powerful monk warriors that betrayed the Republic, now they were being spoken about as if they never existed at all, or there were just a handful of them at most, and then they revised it again so that they never really existed, that they were just rumoured to exist. Then eventually a ban was put on talking about them at all. Again, Freed should never have had to come up with an argument after Hidalgo let people write whatever they wanted for nearly 5 years, but at least Freed has put the effort in to at least try and explain some of the bullshit that's been coming out of the Disney camp. It's not perfect, and it's not entirely believable because of the amount of wide and varying things that have been in the books and comics, but this one little conversation shows Freed has put more effort into this book to fix Star Wars than Hidalgo ever has. Once again, well done, Freed. There's a scene where Chaz explains that Jyn Erso is her hero, and while I'm okay with this, it irked me that when she goes through her rebellions are built on hope speech, it's been rewritten, and again I ask, when are they going to stop retconning stuff, and why are they retconning their own material that was created by them? Rogue One's only a couple of years old. Come on. Not that the length of time from release justifies a retcon in any way, but still, Rogue One is a Disney film, Alphabet Squadron is a Disney book, and when one quotes the other, they still can't get it right. Why has this slipped past Hidalgo's net? Or, if, as he claims, he isn't the person responsible for lore, then whoever is, why did it get past them? You see, I asked him on Twitter, if he's not responsible, who is? And he refused to answer. Somebody else saw this was happening and they said, look, you don't need to tell us who is responsible, but can you at least confirm that someone is responsible, that there is someone or a group of people there to check this stuff? to check lore before things are released so it all adds up, and he refused to answer. I mean, what can you do with that? That's the guy people look to for lore at Disney Star Wars, and that's the attitude he has. He won't even admit that there's somebody there checking the lore. That's Pablo Hidalgo, ladies and gentlemen. It's like Freed either deliberately changed the speech or he tried to quote it but couldn't quite remember it, and rather than popping in the Blu-ray, pulling it up on Netflix, or even just searching for it on YouTube, he went with the easiest option. The words are in the right order, they are the right words, but the sentences are out of order, so I'm not sure what to make of that other than the fact that it's wrong. I found it disappointing. However, he probably expected Hidalgo to check his work, which is just a fool's expectation at this point, so I can't put all the blame on Freed because once again Hidalgo has let this go to print. Seriously, what the fuck does Hidalgo actually do? He's the lawkeeper but gets everything wrong in his own canon. Fire him already. He's a useless, selfish, vicious and hateful little man. The flip side of Chaz looking up to Jyn is that she shits on Luke. Now, we all know how much Johnson shit on his character in The Last Jedi, and while the sentiment is the same here, it's not Freed saying it. It's a character in the book, and I find that to be acceptable. When they're all sharing their stories of how they came to join the rebellion and bonding as a team, Chaz says, and I quote, "You know Jyn Erso, the woman who started it all and destroyed the Death Star? The first one, the real one I mean." And someone else says, "General Skywalker and Red Squadron destroyed the Death Star." To which Chaz replies, "Skywalker fired the last shot was all. Jyn did everything that mattered. I met her once." On the surface, I can see how this would aggravate fans of the OT and Legends and anyone who isn't a social justice warrior. But, and I can't stress this enough, it isn't Freed shitting on Luke's character, because as much as one person said what he did was worthless, another corrected the statement. This is just one character having a different opinion, and I find that acceptable. Not everyone thinks the same, and Chaz just happens to have a different opinion on whose contributions mattered more when it came to destroying the Death Star. She might have had a different opinion had she seen the Battle of Yavin with her own eyes, but she didn't, and she did meet Jyn Erso, so her opinion matches up with her experiences. That's pretty much it for Act 2. It's more about the team coming together and learning how to work as a unit, getting to know each other, getting over their hang-ups, stuff like that. This all prepares them for Act 3, which is the attack on Pandem Nye and their attempt to destroy or otherwise nullify Shadow Wing. It's an okay ending, but I thought it dragged on for a bit. It's pretty much the entire third act, so it outstayed its welcome. It wasn't bad though, it was a good resolution to the main plot of the book, with the Empire leaving Pandem Nye and the rebels trying to save the planet because it has a very volatile atmosphere, and when they blow the Tibanna tanks, it ignites part of the atmosphere, so while the Empire escapes, the rebels try and save the planet and the population, you know, falling debris, village right underneath, etc. It was a good enough ending and leaves this particular group of the Empire still out there, which will undoubtedly play into the next two books. I think the most important thing that happened in Act 3 though wasn't the fact that the rebels drove away the Empire, thereby reducing their fuel supplies. It was the fact that Nath snuck onto the station Colonel Nares, aka Grandmother, the leader of the 204th, was on, and after confirming the TIE pilots that killed his original rebel squadron were dead, he shoots her, and at the last moment she questions whether Operation Cinder and what she was doing now was worth it. Why was she questioning it? Because those motherfucking messenger droids are back. I don't think they're a bad idea, but since they were introduced in the Aftermath trilogy, they've just left a bad taste in my mouth. But yes, all this time Grandmother had been taking orders from one of those red-cloaked droids that expressed the Emperor's pre-planned will. I'm curious how this will play out in the next two books. Did the Emperor consider this as a possibility, or does it even matter at all? We can only wait and see. I thought it was a shame to see Nares go so quickly. She played practically no role, but given the fact that she was a Clone Wars veteran and calls the rebels separatists, which I thought was a nice touch. I thought she was interesting, and Freed could have done a lot more with her character, especially considering the fact that the most obvious comparison for Alphabet Squadron in Legends is the X-Wing books, and the main antagonist in those books was Issane Isard, another woman of high Imperial rank and not exactly what I would describe as young. The power vacuum left by the death of Grandmother leads up to the most mysterious character in the book, who I haven't talked about yet for a reason. At the end of each act, we get a chapter where we follow a character called Devon, a mysterious wanderer who stays on the move and keeps his eyes out for trouble. This is the equivalent of the interludes in the Aftermath trilogy, but unlike the interludes in that shithole of a trilogy that focused on anything and everything and never actually led anywhere, like the Alderaanians looking for the curves of the Death Star so they could rebuild it and live on it, I shit you not, that happened in the interludes in Aftermath. Good job, man. I mean, JJ found the curves of the Death Star, don't know why the Alderaanians couldn't. Did they think of looking on Yavin? The interludes in Alphabet Squadron focus exclusively on Devon and actually lead somewhere. We learn through the interludes that he's intelligent, capable and understands tactics, but we're never told about his past, and that makes him an interesting character and left me wondering exactly who he was, what his backstory was, and how those things combined will affect him and the rest of the trilogy. In his third and final interlude, however, we see him attend a festival on the miserable planet he's working on when two New Republic officers attempt to arrest him. He outfights and kills them, but he realises that no matter where he goes, he will always be hunted. That's when he accepts he can't run any longer and must accept who he is, who he's always been, and that's none other than Major Soren Kizay, Eureka's commanding officer in the 204th and the reason she defected from the Empire in the first place. It was he who convinced her to defect, although it isn't made clear whether it was meant to be an order that she should do it as a spy or a genuine showing of care for Eureka's soul, because the story she tells at the beginning of the book of how she came to be found by the rebels turns out to be a lie, so it's really not clear. Even though she seems to be a good guy right now, and there was a happy ending to the book, it's not clear if she is a good guy in my opinion, and hopefully that's clarified in one of the future books. Devon's character was a good bit of writing in my opinion. Instead of loads of stories that went nowhere and had no impact on Star Wars lore at all, like in the Aftermath trilogy. Remember that one where there was a gay guy sitting in Mos Eisley and he could see gay guys everywhere? That happened in the Aftermath trilogy. I'm not making that up. There was a gay guy who just saw gay guys. It's in there. Another one, some guy finds Boba Fett's armour and decides to become the sheriff of Mos Eisley. Chuck Wendig, smoking too much cock there, mate. The interludes in Alphabet Squadron actually built up to something, and that final reveal of who Devon is means something is going to happen in the next two books, and this makes sense to me because with Grandmother dead after she was assassinated by Nath, the 204th doesn't have anyone leading them, and Kizay just happens to be going back at this time. I suspect the ultimate showdown will be something like Eureka Quell drawing a gun on Kizay on a bridge, so it will mirror how Nath's showdown with Grandmother went in this book, except with Eureka and Kizay there will be more weight to it, but I could be wrong, who knows. We'll have to wait and see. One of the biggest issues with the book for me is that it's a bit of a slog to get through, and this doesn't surprise me in the slightest because it matches the tone of Twilight Company, which was Freed's first Star Wars book. Freed is very good at writing war stories and getting that sense of tone of how people are constantly plodding along almost in despair with no end in sight and like they're going through the motions. While that style of writing does work, I think Alphabet Squadron could have done with a bit of levity to make the book a bit easier to read. Contrast is important. You need highs, you need lows, you need loud, you need quiet, you need happy, you need sad, you need excitement, you need tension. Having opposites gives contrast, which in turn allows certain moments to stand out and give you a different feeling. Think of Luke's joy and eagerness at going off on an adventure, his "I'm Luke Skywalker and I'm here to rescue you" moment, then compare those to Ben being killed killed in front of him and Han leaving. Then again, compare that to his elation when Han comes back and Luke destroys the Death Star. Contrast is important, and sadly, Alphabet Squadron doesn't have any. Hopefully Freed will inject some humour in the other two books, because while Alphabet Squadron is good, the flat tone the entire way through made it a bit of a chore to read, and to be honest, with 5 unique characters and a leader straight from a kid's cartoon show, there's no reason there shouldn't be any humour here. Think about Hobby and Plor in the X-Wing comics. There's no one here like that, but there could and should be. Given that there's 2 more books left in the trilogy, and there's a few mention that Coruscant is still under Imperial control, and the fact that the book is the canon equivalent of the X-Wing books, I wouldn't be the slightest bit surprised if the next 2 books explored the attack on Coruscant, because if I remember correctly, in the first Aftermath book, Coruscant had just fallen, even though we saw the celebrations at the end of the special edition of Return of the Jedi. Another fine job making sure events aren't contradicted from Hidalgo and the story group there. So I think this is where books 2 and 3 will go, with the liberation of Coruscant being the final act of book 3 and the climax of the trilogy. Who knows, maybe while Alphabet Squadron is liberating Coruscant, that's when Irika and Kize will be facing off on a Star Destroyer or something. Hopefully we'll get some Wedge in there too, since this is set before Wendig fucked up his character, so it will be nice to see him working with Alphabet Squadron. Ideally it would be as leader of Rogue Squadron, imagine that, Rogue Squadron and Alphabet Squadron together, but if not, maybe as a higher ranking officer or something. But as cool as that all is, we all know Disney won't let Rogue Squadron back in, they just won't, even though this is their time, this is their era, we all know it's never going to happen. Rogue Squadron is one of George's. Fuck George Lucas. While I enjoyed the book, there's one thing I'm dubious about: The Emperor's Messenger. I've read a trilogy of books where one of those droids was pulling the strings, and we all know how shit those books were. Hopefully the rest of the Alphabet trilogy will remain focused, but also inject a bit of humour to help the book along with its pacing, and also won't fail to deliver a meaningful story about the Messenger the way the Aftermath trilogy did. Don't forget, this is only the 2nd trilogy of books Disney has released so far. There was the Aftermath trilogy, which was a total failure because of the way Chuck Wendig abused it, and the Thrawn books aren't really a trilogy, they're just 3 books that follow the same character, so this trilogy has a lot riding on it. Freed needs to get this right, otherwise we'll be stuck with bland, disconnected books for the rest of the canon. I really hope he gets it right. I'm also questioning where exactly in the timeline the epilogue of Rebels takes place, because we see Ahsoka, Sabine and Hera go searching for Ezra, so when exactly was that, before or after this book? If it was before, did they find him? I'm hoping that Thrawn Treason will have the ending of Rebels in it, and will set up a whole new trilogy set in the unknown regions, with the Chiss fighting the remains of the Empire as they travel through the unknown regions and find Snoke, and I'm hoping Snoke will get involved at that point, and that's when they start building up their forces into the First Empire, and perhaps Ezra has to work with the Chiss, Thrawn and Eli Vanto. I think that would be an excellent trilogy of books. I'm probably asking too much, but it would at least explain what happened to Ezra and Thrawn, and it could show that while the crew of the Ghost may have gone looking for Ezra, they never found him. Or perhaps Ahsoka continued to search for him when Hera went back to the galaxy, and this would allow Ahsoka and Ezra to exist at the same time as the OT without contradicting it, and they both could have been part of the Chiss Empire First Order war against Snoke. You see, Pablo, that's how you write Star Wars, with no contradictions while also opening up the possibilities for new stories. You don't leave characters hanging like, oh yeah, he was important, let's just get rid of him, he just travelled to hyperspace once. You give your characters clear endings. You don't contradict previously established canon. It's really not that difficult. I don't know why he's still in charge over there. I'm just an idiot reviewing Star Wars books, and I can come up with better scenarios than he can. The final thing I think worth noting is that halfway through the book there's this preview of the TIE Fighter comic, and I really don't like it. I don't want comics shoved right in the middle of my novel. I don't like photos in the middle pages of the novelizations, and I don't like the comics here. By all means, have a page at the end of the book that advertises it, but I don't need advertising right in the middle of my fucking novel. It's cheap and nasty. They've also put a little banner on the front that talks about how it's a Marvel crossover, and I could get over it on the front, even though I don't like it, but it goes on the spine too, and I don't like the way it looks on my shelf. It just looks stupid. So please, let's keep advertising for the front and back pages. Let's not have a comic right in the middle of my fucking novel I'm trying to fucking read. Thank you very fucking much. So overall, I did enjoy Alphabet Squadron, even though an injection of humour could have made the book that much more enjoyable. But compared to some of the shit we've had in the new canon, this is definitely a promising start to the second trilogy of novels, and I am actually looking forward to the next book. Hopefully now that I know all the characters, what they fly, the team dynamics, the personalities, the next book won't be as much of a slog to read as this was, but in spite of that, I think Freed has sat down and actually tried to think of logical things, sensible situations, and he's referenced lore from other media without contradicting it, except for the Hera Syndulla leading the attack on the second Death Star thing. Unforgivable, Freed. But he has tried to come up with intelligent situations rather than bullshit ones like in The Last Jedi, and I think Alphabet Squadron is a strong entry in the new canon. As long as he doesn't lose any pace, keeps up with the not contradicting lore, the trilogy will be okay, but if he gains some pace, it will be even better. But yeah, I liked Alphabet Squadron, and I'm looking forward to reading the next book in the trilogy.